Welcome to The Vinyl Guide, the podcast for record collectors and music nerds. Here's your host, the biggest record nerd of them all, Nate Goyer.
Oh, well, hey, everyone, it's Nate. Welcome to episode 546 of The Vinyl Guide, the podcast for record collectors and music nerds. And dear people, today we are talking one-step audiophile vinyl pressings with none other than Tom Grover Biery, who has an amazing background. 20-some years at Warner Brothers, Tom was a main driver of the vinyl revival, an architect of Record Store Day, and today his ears are still doing the Lord's work. Tom has recently launched 2 new lines of one-step audiophile vinyl, Because Sound Matters and the Definitive Sound series, along with his own label, Slowed Down Sounds. And he talks about all of these today. And of course, with the background that Tom has and the label contacts that come with it, he's doing these audiophile one-step reissues for artists that can only be unlocked in the rarefied air in which Tom occupies. We're talking Dr. Dre, R.E.M., A Perfect Circle, Beach Boys, and many more are coming. Tom continues to be a pioneer of the vinyl art form, and he's putting out some amazing product. Just listen up and be amazed. Now, my advice, order these while you can. There are extremely limited numbers, which Tom will explain. Because they are a one-step vinyl process, they can only make a limited number of lacquers. So these pressings sell out very quickly. The REM one just sold out, and it now goes for like several times its original price in secondary markets. I just ordered the Pet Sounds one. There seems to be some left at Acoustic Sounds. So grab one while you can. Also, check out the Chet Baker release on Slow Down Sounds. It is an absolutely gorgeous package. I'll put a link to that in this episode page. And before we get into the interview, have you joined my Patreon yet? Because Patreon supporters got the early jump on the news and ordering some of these titles that are quickly selling out. It continues to be a good idea to become a show supporter at patreon.com/vinylguide. Not only do you get high-resolution audio, not only do you get episodes with no interruptions, you get early access to the episodes and interviews and the jump on some amazing vinyl deals before they sell out. That's patreon.com/vinylguide. It keeps me full of beer and burritos, and you get to reap the benefits. All right, let's jump on the horn with Tom Grover Biery and talk about one-step audiophile vinyl pressings. Ladies and gentlemen, this week on the Vinyl Guide, we are welcoming friend of the show, Tom Grover Biery. And Tom, I've you and I have become friendly over the years, but I first heard your name from Ken Andrews of Failure when he was talking about how they got Fantastic Planet launched on vinyl. And this is years after the fact that the record had been released, or the CD had been released. People weren't even talking about vinyl at this point. And then here comes this savior of theirs, Tom Grover Biery, who suggested, perhaps foolishly at the time, that this album should be available on vinyl. And we are all grateful for it. So, Tom, welcome to the show. I'm glad to have you on. If you can, spend a moment giving people a bit of perspective on your background.
So the short version, which there is no such thing as a short version with a decades-long career. But I worked at Warner Brothers Records for 20 years, and the last 10 or so had a significant executive job, and ultimately ran the company day to day. And so inside of that moment in time was also piracy and file sharing and Napster and all this stuff. This is before Spotify and iTunes showed up, right? And we're just trying to figure out ways to generate new revenue streams, right? And I was just always a vinyl guy, and I thought, well, we should try to start doing some vinyl records. And this goes back to about 2004-ish. And so because I had this big job, nobody could really stop me from doing it. But nobody really had to help me much. And that's how I started to learn how to make records, is because I wanted to do it. So that's how I began my relationships with people like Chad at Acoustic Sounds, was very helpful in the early days, like still a good friend. Talked to him the other day. Don McGinnis at RTI, Rick Hashimoto when he was there, now at Fidelity, Doran, who does play. All these are long, long relationships. And it all goes way back to just the idea of, well, maybe we should try to stand for sound. And maybe we should really try to like have some vinyl records come out and see what happens. And so we did that, and it exploded. The billing went from around 300,000 top line revenue to over $5 million in 18 months.
Wow. So
Yeah.
when you suggested vinyl, and Fantastic Plan is probably one of a handful that you threw out initially, yeah?
Yeah.
How difficult? Well, of course, you were the boss, but you must have got some very weird looks of people saying, vinyl, that's been dead for 20 years.
I definitely did. But my boss was a guy named Tom Wally, who was the chairman, and he was a visionary and a record guy, and he was like, do it. He was totally supportive. And so I just did it basically. And the first records were done by Kevin Gray and Steve Hoffman. And it was a version of Joni Mitchell Blue, and it was Van Morrison, and it was more catalog records. But then we started shifting from there. And I think Wilco Sky Blue Sky. Yeah. I think Wilco was one of the first records where all of a sudden it came out as a new release on vinyl. And I want to say we did over 10,000 quickly. And that was this is going back. That's like 2008, I think. And so, it just kind of kept going from there. And with failure in particular, it was always such a great, like internally, the company loved failure. We didn't have the success that any of us would have liked, but it wasn't from a lack of not believing. And it just seemed like it was such a great sounding record. It was LA, K-Rock was supportive at the time, whatever. And it just seemed like a good one to do. And now that pressing is like, that's a hard one to find, and it's expensive. It needs to be redone again, actually.
Oh yeah, because they've done a few repressings since. I have my original, but yeah, you think it's ready for a revamp?
I mean, we'll get into this at some point, but it could, almost sounds like it could be a good one step in a way.
Ooh, yeah.
I don't know if the audience is there for that, but man, it would sound spectacular in that format. So, but anyways, so yeah, that's where failure came into play there. Remember, we did Static X, we just started doing vinyl, and the thing that we always cared about, based on a conversation with Neil Young, Neil would always come into the company and play his new records. And one time he called up and he came in, and we were all in a conference room, and he brought in a special sound system, like way better than what we normally had. And he played his greatest hits record. And he actually played it on DVD audio. And he did a whole speech at the end, and he ended it by saying, because sound matters. And that's how the Warner brand, Because Sound Matters, began, was sitting in a room with a bunch of other people hearing Neil Young music and having the legend Neil Young actually do this impassioned speech about sound. And that's how we ended it. And to me, it just became a marketing phrase that was obvious.
So now, again, the Because Sound Matters, that is the vinyl, the deluxe vinyl imprint that you have with Warner's. And then you have the Definitive Sound Series, which is Capitol and Interscope. So which artist said Definitive Sound Series?
So going back a second for Because Sound Matters, we launched a website in 2008. So the Audiophile series of Because Sound Matters is just kind of reactivating it years later. And so we were early on that tip too, right? No, I mean, there were almost no online stores. I mean, I think Acoustic Sounds existed, and that was about it. So forget a major label doing it. That was unheard of at that point. And I had some great support from people, to pull that off or whatnot. And then to answer your question about Definitive Sound Series, I think we just, the executives that I work with at Interscope and Capitol, we were just trying to come up with what felt right, logo wise, just all of it. And I just always said to people, it's the definitive version of the record. And it kind of just went from there. And that's how the Definitive Sound series, which is short, DSS and then BSM, and the way that I fit in there is the simplest way to describe it is, I'm a consultant to both companies. And one of the reasons that I did it that way, because I have my own label, Slow Down Sounds, as well, but I knew that a big company's not going to license me Linkin Park and Green Day and Dr. Dre and Beck and REM. It's just not going to happen. And so I was able to, based on years of relationships and so on, and people believing in it, Warner signed up for it, and we did Linkin Park and Green Day and Katie Lang and most recently Prince and Tom Petty. And then at some point along the way, actually the most supportive person at Warner for that website was a guy named Xavier Ramos, and he's now a senior executive at Interscope Capital. So he was there from the beginning as well at Warner. And so he just believed in the whole thing and believed in the idea of sound. It all comes back to that damn Neil Young thing, and I know a lot of people don't like to really maybe believe this or whatnot, but I mean, I see it and I live it every day that, Interscope Capital, they care deeply about sound and respecting their artist and how they care about, of course, streaming as much as possible, right? But at the same time, they care about delivering the absolute best quality. And it's the same at Warner, we've got, it's going to be a great next few months for audiophiles and superfans. I can't tell you all these records that are coming, but there's a lot of great ones. And I'll make sure that you get them, Nate, because some of these records, I have a feeling are right up your alley. Knowing you, knowing the podcast, knowing your vibe in Vegas and all this stuff, right? I think you'll dig some of these. So, so that's Because Sound Matters. That's DSS. And then my label, Slow Down Sounds, I've had for almost 10 years. That's always, so I often went back and took corporate jobs inside the music business. So I never was able to put the complete focus on it. But I have most recently put a little more time and effort in, and I'm going to put a lot more in. But we talked about it. I think I might have sent you. I'm not sure, but the most recent thing was Chet Baker,
Yes.
and Swimming by Moonlight, and that's done really well. That was a partnership with Bruce Weber, who made the documentary Let's Get Lost, and he's working on a whole new. Calls it a music video, but it happens to be like 70 minutes long. That goes with this record. So he's made videos and then put all this amazing old footage into it with new footage. And he's creating this amazing piece that goes with the album. And he was just in LA last week, and, he's getting closer, but he's a super perfectionist and very passionate about Chet. And so this is not going to be out until he's like, okay, I'm good now, but it's happening, and I've seen a rough of it, and it's great. And it's going to be really nice to have it along with the record. And we are talking about even a second Chet of unreleased music from 40 years ago.
So there's a lot to unpack there. So let me go there, because you're right. You were absolutely good enough to send me a couple of these to kind of tease the senses, and they are glorious. I've A-B'd a few of them together, like A Perfect Circle, Mur de Noms. I've got the original pressing, which is still a great pressing. The pressing that you created, I think it's the DSS. That is really next level. I mean, the bit at the end of 3 Libras where Maynard's voice just kind of lifts. It's breathtaking. It's beautiful. Yeah. And I felt like I got the impression these are kind of the final form. This is the deluxe, the prestige kind of version of this music.
So it's a process, and it's the original source, right? That's most vital to the whole thing, right? Because, there are some people who, they're expensive, right? So a single record's like $100 and a double's $125. So they're not cheap, They actually feel a little cheaper to me than they did a couple of years ago because vinyl just keeps getting more expensive, you know, in general. But anyways, they are expensive. There's no around that. But, and there may be people who are like, oh, it doesn't really make a difference. A one step, it's kind of a gimmick. There's that vibe is out there as well. But I would vehemently disagree with that because I also have A and B'd. And not only have I A and B'd like a pressing, but I've A and B'd like multiple pressings, multiple sources. We gather as many sources as we can to even decide what's the best source. Because most all these records are iconic. So you've got digital sources, you've got transfers from back in the day, you have new transfers, you have them at 9624, you have them at 19224. What was the apparatus? What was the chain of that transfer? What was the chain? I mean, there's so much goes into it, right? And at the end of the day, I feel that the one-step records are just super revealing. And so my role as a producer of these records isn't to really change anything. It's to take what's on the tape or what's on the file and present that in the best possible sound. We're not, Chris Bellman does a lot of these records if they're from tape. Levi Seitz at Black Belt Mastering does a lot of the digital stuff. We're all simpatico. All of us talk all the time, and everyone's aligned with we're not trying to reinvent a mastering job. We're just trying to take what's already there. And in the case of Prince, it was a 192/24 EQ file, and that's all that Prince ever delivered to the label. So he clearly wanted that to be used. He did deliver the tape, right? But I was afraid of using the tape because you have to cut so many lacquers in this process. And I'll get into the process a little bit, like just a quick snapshot of what it looks like. But anyways, people at first were like, wait, I don't know about this. And then once they sort of heard it a couple of times, they started to realize like, this is pretty great. And it's the same. I mean, I'm so fortunate that people have responded this way. Okay. So the price is one thing, but the actual sound of the records, I mean, most fans are into it. If you look at Discogs reviews, I mean, forget the reviewers in the audiophile world who I appreciate and love. But when it comes down to it, this can't sustain and can't be something. And I can't develop an actual new variant, which is the goal. I'd like to release current records in this format, but it can't happen without fans supporting it. And so fortunately, most fans seem to love what we're doing.
Oh yeah.
Well, it's rewarding.
I'm starting to try to fill in the gaps in my collection. Like I've ordered the Prince now. I've ordered the REM. There's a few others that are kind of like, okay, because I want to collect them all. And some of the music is not something that I would listen to all the time. So Tom Petty, Wildflowers, that was not a record that was totally on my radar. But now listening to it in this version is really rewarding, and it helps me rediscover an artist or, appreciate some of their best work.
Well, Tom Petty, Wildflowers, and Beck, Morning Phase, both have great pressings all along the way. They're great recordings done really well from the get-go, and they have really awesome pressings out there. And I was really, I wouldn't say the word worried, but I was curious how the response would be to both as a one step, because the normal pressings that are out there are really great, right? And somehow, seems like we beat them, because everybody, like the reviews on Tom Petty and on Beck and fans, and I mean, people they just get that it's next level. Is it dramatic in those regards? No, it's not. REM's maybe the most dramatic for whatever the reasons are. But Petty and Beck, it's not dramatic, but there's enough of a nuance there that people seem to really get it. There's something that's left behind. Mm-hmm. And to me, that's that's my argument for the naysayers of one steps, right? Or the naysayers of an heirloom type record, because these are numbered. They will not be repressed. They're very collectible, you know, and they're going to only go up in value for sure. If you look at, I know you collect and buy a lot of records, as do I, right? And we don't do it, at least I don't think you do from what I know of you. I don't do it thinking, oh, it's going to be valuable later. It's just a nice add-on when it is.
Yeah.
And that's what these records represent, right? I mean, yeah, I do feel it's something that is of the quality that it won't be beat. And so therefore you can pass it on as the best pressing ever made to whoever it is, your family or a friend, or ultimately you could sell it or whatever, you know?
I like that. Heirloom pressing. So you said something that I didn't realize. These are all limited. They'll never be reissued. Now, I know there was just a version of Pet Sounds announced. So
Yeah.
there are a finite number of those. Yeah.
So yeah, so with Pet Sounds, which is so it's like a dream to be able to do it. I mean, this whole idea of audiophile records, superfan records, high quality records began a long, long time ago. Like I was saying at the beginning of the conversation, right? We cared about the quality of the pressings all the way back, like when we started 2004, 5, 6 in that area. So this isn't really new. It's just the next level. But I've been, a huge fan of Pet Sounds for a long, long time. And I can't remember how many years ago, but at some point, Gary Johnson over at Rockaway Records was telling me about this 1972 pressing as part of Carl and the Passions. And up to that point, I didn't know about it. So I have multiple copies of the original, all mono, by the way. I don't have any stereo versions of the record. I have all mono versions, but I've got a couple, two or three original pressings from different plants or whatever. And then I've got the DCC version, which Steve Hoffman did. And Chad did both stereo and mono. I think he did them at 33 and 45 maybe, but I've got the mono 33 that Analog Productions did. And I always liked them and I thought they were really good. But then when Gary, told me about, that the Carl and the Passions one, and I got it, he got it for me, I couldn't, it was like so different to me. And that just kind of sat on the back burner, and just as a fan, that was my go-to version,
Can I ask, just stop real quick in terms of that Carl and the Passions? Can you briefly explain what that is? I'm not clear on
Okay.
that. Yeah.
So yeah. So okay, in 19 I think 68, around 68, 69, somewhere in that neighborhood, the Beach Boys left Capitol and started their own label called Brother, as Brother Records.
Mhm.
Brother Records was distributed by Reprise. And so they did, I think, two or three Beach Boy proper releases. But at some point in 1972, Brian had produced Carl Wilson. So Carl and the Passions, he'd produced that record for Brother, their label, coming out on Reprise.
Mm-hmm.
And so at that point, somebody had the idea, maybe we should do a twofer. And they put Carl and the Passions, and then they reissued Pet Sounds for the first time.
Oh.
And that is, I have it somewhere. But oh right, we're not doing video. So but Carl and the Passions and the Beach Boys, Pet Sounds, were together. At the same time in 1972, Pet Sounds came out as a standalone in Canada with a brown cover instead of the green cover. And then from that point forward, 74, 75, they started reissuing Pet Sounds through their own label with a brown cover as opposed to the green one. And so, once I got into it, the archival team at Capitol, we found the 1972 master, so we found the tape.
And what did Brian do to that tape that made it so different?
So I don't think Brian necessarily did anything, and it's kind of hard. I've read a lot of different books, and I've asked a lot of people that have been very involved with Brian and the Beach Boys for a long time, and I never could get like a complete straight answer. But the best that I can tell, they put out three records. The Beach Boys put out three records in 1965, and then Rubber Soul um, was around, came in 60. So much was happening, and it was kind of the beginning of the idea of an album. Everything was pretty much 45s, right? It's pretty much singles and radio songs. And I think, there was just so much pressure on Brian, to get this record done. And, he'd taken, I mean, think about Pet Sounds and think about at that moment in time, the vocal dubs, the harmonies, the instruments. I mean, you can't even believe he did it, you know? Um, and then, the Beach Boys themselves were touring because Brian didn't tour with them at that point. And they came back, and I don't think they really liked it that much. And the Capitol executives definitely didn't like it. And I can only imagine, based on working with artists all these years that I have, I'm sure Brian must have been hurt by that and disappointed. And I think from that point forward, I mean, there's work that was being done on this record in April for a release in May. So I feel like the first versions of the record, because no one cared. It's all different in the history of Pet Sounds, but in that moment, 66, 67, it wasn't very successful. Much bigger in the UK, thanks to Paul McCartney and the Beatles, had a nice run there in the top 10, not in the US. And it just seemed like everybody just rushed it out. So when they got ready to do this reissue, I believe that, it was, I think Carl more than anyone, but they went to Artisan, which was like a great mastering house. And it just seems like they took their time and just tried to balance things out a little bit more. And that whole wall of sound that is so bombastic, it still is on the 72 pressing, but it's just tamed a little. And it just allows the whole presentation to be, I don't know, it just seems more balanced, And we've sent a lot of test pressings out to people, and everyone who's heard it so far seems to definitely agree,
Yeah.
And again, there's 400 variants. There's 400 versions of this record, man. That's a lot.
So this version that is coming out on DSS, that is the 72 version where they had 6 years or so to really understand why Pet Sounds was so special. In the hurricane of 66, like you said, they had a month to mix, or if that. Yeah. But now they were able to breathe a bit and focus on kind of what made that album special.
That's what I think. That's what my research has said. That's what there were notes on the tapes. Not many notes, but there were like little comments. There were, I mean, the actual tape box has a date of 1975 on it. So on all the media and the liner notes and stuff, I always say circa 1972, because we never could actually find an actual tape that said 1972. And we could never determine if these tapes might have just been when the date 1975 might have been put on them when they came back to Capitol, right? Because they were at Reprise. There's a lot of missing information about what's there. But what we for sure know is that the tapes sounded just like a white label promo from 72, right? We had Chris Bellman lined up the record and the tape at the exact same time, and even the spacing between the songs matched perfectly.
Okay.
And even today, it's unusual, by the way. So it was really a clue of like, oh, we don't know that this is like that very original tape, but we definitely knew that it matched exactly that pressing. It was an EQ tape. So Carl or whoever was mastering that tape that day, they did EQ it, and they did it the way that they clearly wanted it to be presented. And Chris didn't touch it. We just ran the tape, and he transferred that onto a lacquer, right? So what you hear is definitely, what was on that tape.
And
we didn't. boost anything. We didn't mess with the thing. It was amazing.
And this reissue, how many of them are going to be available? And then they're done.
So it's part of the 60th anniversary of Pet Sounds. So do you know about the vinyl file series?
No, share.
It's a, it's it's another audiophile series that's done inside of UME, inside of Universal's catalog division.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not involved with it, but there's a version coming out of Pet Sounds mono stereo of the mono's the 66, some version of that, and then the stereo. I guess is what Mark Lynette did at one point, but again, I don't know that much. But then there's a Zoetrope version. There's like a CD sessions, and then there's this DSS one step. So they're all coming out May 15th. The retail part of the record is probably going to end up being a little later, but we'll ship D2C and we'll do all we can to get it all out in the middle of May. But we're doing 6,000. And
that's not that many for such a landmark record.
No, I was going to say, and I don't know when this will air or whatnot, but I mean, I would not sleep on it because it's gonna be really close, if not completely sold out before it comes out. And so, in retrospect, we probably should have made more to meet the demand, but at the same time, we weren't really sure. It was a different version of, there's so much criteria to think about, and because we don't repress the records, and again, if we viewed it differently, if Interscope Capital viewed it differently, we could just repress the record, and just keep doing as many as possible. Right. But that's kind of not the vibe. We're trying to create, like I said earlier, like these heirloom type records. So there's 6,000. And that's all there will be. Now, that's not to say that we're not thinking about another tier. That might be the master, that 72 master, but it's not going to be in a beautiful slipcase. It's not going to be numbered, and it's not going to be a one step.
Right.
I do a 3-step, and I meant to sort of bring this up earlier that, basically a 3-step record goes through a process of the source to a lacquer, to a father, to a mother, to the stamper, essentially. A 1-step record goes from the lacquer to the stamper. You still have to do a little plating to make the convert, but it's basically you're going from the lacquer to the stamper, and then you're making the records. And you can only get about 500, maybe 750 at the most from that stamper. So instead of cutting one lacquer, for Pet Sounds, we cut 9 because you only get so many pressings per lacquer. And that's one of the reasons these records are expensive, because the mastering alone is 9x on this. People don't, fans don't really know that. It's just, we're all constantly talking about it, but just the mastering alone is 9x.
Yeah. And the one thing I know that I think people will relate to is the generational loss. If you take a tape, record it to another tape, then record that tape to a third, you start to lose fidelity pretty quickly. That may not be such a drastic drop off with vinyl, but it's there. So the more generations you go through, the more steps you go through, the more incremental loss you will have along the way. So that's, again, I think was part of the secret sauce of what makes these sound great. And also the vinyl compound, it's so quiet. When I put on that Tom Petty, I was like my first thought was like, fuck, is my receiver on? Like, I thought, what is that?
I love that you said that, Nate, because that's the other, it's this company Neotech. That's, by the way, they make the regular 180, they make the regular pellets too, right? But they him, a guy named Casey Gibson and Don McGinnis that owns RTI, they developed this together. I think mostly Casey. And not many presses can even handle the compound. It's very finicky. There's a lot of waste with it. It's not simple. You got to QC this thing every day, all day long. You got to look at every one. They're very susceptible to thumbprints. So the vinyl itself is the whole thing it's just a different compound, but the benefit of it is what you're saying, where it is so dead quiet, which is all part of the clarity and the dynamics of the music truly being all you hear, you know? And when I forget the occasional pops or whatnot that come with current vinyl. For me, I can almost tell you who pressed a record just by listening to like the space in between, the lead in and the lead out. Sometimes they're just unbelievably noisy. And once the music starts, it's as long as it's not a quiet record, you're good. But if it's a quiet record, that noise is there. It doesn't go away. It's just
Oh,
masked, right? And so it just has an impact on that ultimate sound. And I do think the big difference for me, anyways, Neotech, not every plant uses Neotech, because it's more expensive. Just like wine or a restaurant or like anything, you can get like, you're cheaper, you're middle, and you're expensive. And the Neotech vinyl is expensive, like the raw compound, not just the D2, which is what we use for the one-step records, but their normal vinyl is amazingly quiet. I mean, the records I've been hearing, and I'm not just saying it because I do all my records at RTI, but their pressings right now are so quiet. And they did a couple things recently that just somehow, I don't know, that they're just I'm just so impressed with their pressings right now. Not to say that like there aren't other people making great records. Chad makes great records. Paramount, Dave makes great records. Got a Groove, great records. But at the same time that there's those guys making great records, there's twice as many making not so great records, or maybe what you would just say are normal records. You know,
well,
um,
the more we listen to great records, the more we recognize when they're not so great. Right?
yeah,
Is this the same compound? Where was it? Joe Harley, the project, the ones he
yeah,
did before Blue Note. Is that the same compound that he was using?
it is. It's not the D2 compound,
Right.
but it is still Neotech. It's called VR 900. Yeah, so music matters.
Yeah.
It's been a compound that RTI has been using for a very, very, very long time. But there's the vinyl compound's one part of it. I mean, I used to. This is going back maybe at least 10 years. We used to sit around the kitchen table and talk about like, a version of farm to table, like what are the ingredients? And I remember writing like sticker copy, and it just seemed too much for people to comprehend. But honestly, these are ingredients. The print is an ingredient. The paper is an ingredient. The compound's an ingredient. It's all an ingredient to getting that amazing sounding record, you know?
So I'm curious as to your opinion on this, because in the past few years we've had controversy around what is a proper master, and I think Mophie got its fingers burned a little bit. And there was a discussion at the time about creating a standard so people understand, just like you said, a farm to table, what their sources are, how this has come together, the elements that come together for creating a record. Now, it may be overkill for 98% of the listeners, but for the minority, for us super nerds, we kind of want to know. What are your thoughts on that?
So, first of all, I think that every year during Record Store Day Summer Camp, Illuminate, that tracks sales in the U.S., they do a presentation, not on sales, but they do a lot of exit polls, and they ask fans a lot of questions. And I've been going, I think, for 3 years now. And quality used to be like 9 or 10 on the list of why people bought vinyl. And last year it was either 2 or 3. So even younger vinyl buyers are realizing that there is a difference between pressings and between the process. So I think, if it was only, I'm not naive to think that everyone cares, but I think more people care today than they did 3 years ago. And more people will care in 3 more years than they did today. So it's the quality, the transparency of where this where the music's made will start to get more and more traction. And, there were comments on some of the forums and a couple places when they started seeing, because sound matters and also with DSS, I'm very transparent on the back of the slipcases, the source, everything about it. And people were suggesting, oh, that's because of what happened with MoFi, right? Because they were sort of claiming that it was coming from tape, but they had one step in the process that flipped it, to a DSD stream. And but that's not why. I was putting transparent information about pressing records from the very beginning in 2005. So we didn't do it as like a legal thing because they got in trouble
or anything.
No,
Yeah.
it was not a response at all. Like I was saying, 10 years ago, we were sitting around my kitchen table, with like Casey Gibson and Rick Hashimoto and people we were like doing stuff, and vinyl was like happening, and we were like ingredients and writing this stuff down. So yeah, it's not because of what happened with MoFi. It's because I really believe that people should know, like you said, it's the nerd in all of us, but the nerd is getting bigger.
Right. People are interested in the ingredients. Even my kids are reading food packages way more than I ever did. They want to understand the source because there's a lot of suspicion out there, and
Yes.
and a lot of it's founded, right? So
Yeah, agreed, 100%.
So it'd be interesting to fast forward a few years, and maybe there will be some sort of standard for, putting these things out.
Well, the other thing too is that to me, it's not about what the information is. It's just providing the information so that people know. Like, if it's a digital source, fine. I've done one steps from a digital source. No problem. If it's from a vinyl master that was made, if like wherever it's from, wherever it was pressed, whoever did the work, everyone's making a living. Everyone's just trying to, put out good stuff, basically. Some do it better than others, but everyone's committed. I don't know anyone who's not committed or passionate about what they're doing when it comes to making records. Some are better than others, but no one's just phoning it in, so to speak. When you're pressing millions and millions and millions of records a year, it's a little different than pressing 1 million a year. Your criteria is a little different. Mass production is different than like niche,
Well, I disagree. I think there are a few people phoning it in, but but look again, but I agree with you. From a digital source, I'm okay with that. To me, it's like, and I lost zero respect for MoFi through this process because I know to me, I still trust them. They're like a chef, right? And they're going to bring me a meal. I trust that they're going to provide a good meal for me, and whether I'd like it or maybe there's other options or whatever, but they have my trust. Look, you look at the Robert Johnsons. Every Robert Johnson song we have is sourced from a 78 record. So
yes, 100%.
A tape source does not equal,
No.
It's an indicator, but it doesn't equal the top quality.
I agree. And I thought that like when it came to MoFi, I just thought like, do you like the record or not?
Yeah.
I mean, I buy dollar records I love, and I've bought $75 records. I wonder why I bought it. I mean, I don't understand why people got so crazy about it, because to me, either you like it or you don't. You enjoy listening to Bob Dylan at 45 RPM, great.
Well, I think it was the honesty. I think that was where it kind of got
I
them.
guess,
That's
but, yeah.
So when you consider a title, what's the criteria? Like, how do you assess whether these should be put out on DSS or Because Sound Matters? What needs to be in place for those?
So, there's not a massive amount of criteria, truthfully. Like there's a group of us at both Warner and at Interscope Capital, and they're very engaged in the whole process, and we kind of we go through certain things that we think make sense. There are some managers that are way more into vinyl and into the idea of what that can mean from a fan perspective for their artist than others. Some people take some convincing. Um, we look at like in some ways, it's weirdly helpful if there hasn't been a great pressing over the years. Um, but I think we've sort of recently proven with Beck and Petty especially, that even with great pressings out there, there's still like this great market for like the next tier up, you
Mhm.
know? We look at obviously we look at Discogs like we're kind of all looking at it all the time anyway. So we try to like ascertain as much info as we can, like what's an original go for, what's the most recent reissue, where was the reissue done, what was the source. Source is a big deal. Like we definitely we've done a really good job of explaining to artists and managers why we need flat masters or final mixes and not a master that's been compressed to hell.
Mhm.
That we can't use those for a one step. It defeats the whole thing. So everyone's been really supportive from an artist's perspective. And of course, they're involved all the way. They get to approve every test pressing. None of this is happening in a vacuum. This is all happening collectively with artists and managers, right? And some more than others want to be involved and hear test pressings. Some don't care, but the idea that it's a collaborative effort with each manager and artist makes it all. Yeah, I mean, I just don't think there's any other way to do something like this if they're not at least aware and supportive in some level.
Are you finding, because a lot of the titles that you press are out of the 90s or early 2000s, that a lot of those flat masters are missing? Is it more difficult to find materials that are not compressed to hell, that were not made with CD first in mind?
Um, well, first of all, the lane of the 90s and the 2000s, because so much of it is digital, was neglected by the traditional third-party audiophile companies. I mean, they probably wouldn't license most of these records anyways, but even if they would, like a lot of people are purist about that, and I'm not, because that would be taking decades of some of the greatest music ever made out of the idea of like definitive sounding record, right?
Hmm.
Um, and so um, the ones where there's not a great source you don't know about, no one knows about because we don't do them.
Hmm.
There's definitely artists that we've wanted to do that there just hasn't been the right source. But almost so far, all the records we've done are either from tape or 192, 96, 24, either a vinyl master or a flat master or final mix. Again, I wouldn't do a one step that came from a CD master.
Right.
I wouldn't do one. I wouldn't do a one step if the only source was what was available on streaming or a CD, unless it was done from the get go without compression.
Okay.
There are CDs that I would consider hi-fi CDs. Like I'm almost obsessed with hi-fi CDs right now
Hmm.
because they're like cheap as hell. It's the best value in music. I'm not a purist. I love my vinyl. But, so there are CDs that sound amazing that could maybe make a really great one step, but we just haven't done that yet. We haven't had to do that yet. You know, most of the things that we haven't gone all the way on are because there's like a 44 116 or there's a 44 124. Um, my Chet Baker record on my own label was 4824. It came originally from tape and then was transferred. And that's not a one step D2 pressing, but it's an audiophile pressing. And that came on 4824. Neil Young Harvest Moon is a 4824 recording. Sounds phenomenal,
Well,
you know?
I think Failure Fantastic Planet is 44.1. It was made on 8 ATs.
I can't remember. Are you sure there wasn't 9624 at some point?
I think they said
Oh,
when I
no.
talked to Ken, they recorded it on the Alesis
That's right.
ADATs. Yeah,
Yeah.
which
And that was
recorded a
44.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, you know what? I'm making a note actually, because I'm gonna ask the guys over at the Warner Archive about that just to see, because again, that pressing sounds people love that pressing that we did.
I'm talking
That's not a
multi-tracks though, so it could have been mastered completely. Yeah, but I
Yeah, maybe it's worth asking, I go to Cobuzz a lot because Cobuzz, if it's 9624, if there's a 9624 file on Cobuzz, it's a good indicator that there is a 9624, like some version of a proper file,
mm,
you know. Um, and sometimes, in the 90s and early 2000s, bands recorded in Pro Tools, but they still mixed to tape, and then they went back, to digital. So when you can find those tapes, whether they're compiled or not, it's another indicator of like, oh, I bet you those sound really good, you know? Um, yeah.
the one thing I've also noticed about these pressings that you're doing, the artwork. Again, I don't know if that's part of the criteria, but I have yet to see a record in either of these series where the artwork is a little dodgy or a little pixelated. It seems like you've had access to high resolution versions of the imagery.
Yeah. Again, it's because I do it inside the big companies, and there are people there that are experts at finding this stuff. It's not random like a third party license where someone just sends you what you have to use. That happens. Most third parties are like that. And that's not my situation. And so there are people like experts doing all the big, they're running departments, and they're helpful. And so that's why these packages look so great. And it's funny that you bring that up because we did Lionel Richie Can't Slow Down, which wasn't an obvious record. And I'm really happy that we did it. We need to sell more of them. There's still like too many that haven't sold. We've had some amazing reviews recently, but at that period of time in the early 80s, everything was flipping. Digital was just beginning. Programming was different, and these were all real musicians playing. And the recording is phenomenal. But it's funny that you bring up the art because I've had multiple people mention that particular cover, it is like, it's so perfect. And we didn't really do anything different. We didn't like say, oh, let's try to really make sure it pops or anything. It's just because we have experts inside these companies that are able to find you know, as close as we can get to the real deal, you
Yeah.
know?
And a lot of this stuff I would assume doesn't exist. So, I mean, some of the artwork that's done in the 90s is probably still on a hard drive at the bottom of some landfill. So the fact that some of these records just look as sharp as they do. And another thing, and the packaging, like I've got quite a few audiophile pressings. Sometimes they're a bit cumbersome. They take up big sections of my shelving, which is starting to become problematic. These are nice and thin, and they're very quick to open and get out and then put away, which is kind of a benefit for me because if there's a record tucked away in a box set, part of my brain will count that as a negative when it comes to the actual playing experience. I'm assuming you guys thought this whole thing through.
We did. And again, I'm a huge fan, right? I buy these records. So I have the boxes just like you. And it also drove me crazy. Like, why is there all this excess waste? And so that's why we did them. That's why the one steps that I do, these audiophile records they're in a beautiful, very sturdy, scuff resistant slipcase, but it's thin, and it's just enough to fit a gatefold, whether it's a double gatefold or a single gatefold, and that's it. And it just takes up so much less space. And then the other thing, to your point, it's so easy to take the record out. you know and it used to drive me crazy exactly what you said, basically. The big box sets with the lids on them, and then you're taking the lid off, and then there's like some other paper that doesn't mean anything. And I mean, these one-step records are all just straight reissues, essentially. So we're not adding tons of other music to them. We're not adding lots of, photos. We're not, it's not a deluxe like box set mentality. It's a reissue. It just happens to be the best sounding reissue that you're ever going to hear.
Is there a universe where the entire Beatles catalog has a very similar treatment to this?
That would certainly be a dream, you know. It's funny because I keep thinking if Pet Sounds might help someone, someone somewhere go,
Loosen
oh
that
man,
up.
yeah, maybe. I don't know. I mean, look, I've got most all the original UK mono Beatles records. Starting around, I think there was a series in 76. They're called the double EMI boxes. And those are great sounding records. It's been done so many times. MoFi, of course, back in the day did them all, but no one's ever done a one step, you know. So I suppose the door's like some version of open, but yeah, certainly not at this point. But yeah, that'd be not just the Beatles though. Think about, I mean, I don't know. I'm just so bullish on the idea of the sound. And so when I think of my most favorite records in my own collection, why shouldn't they all have it? Like why wouldn't you want every Springsteen record as a one step? You've got the Wild and the Innocent, and you've got Greetings that MoFi did, you know. Um, but why not? Like I don't think there's a one step Dylan record, not a one step Stones record. There's not a one step Who record. There's not a one step many records. And so, for me, it's about trying to create a whole new variant. And it's not a money grab. It's never been about that. It's about trying to figure out how younger new fans of vinyl can experience the sound as early as possible and enjoy it forever. And you don't need to go and buy crazy gear to get the benefit of the sound. You can, okay, are you going to get the benefit of the sound on like a Crosley or cheaper Audio Technica, which are great to have for kids, whatever. I'm not dissing any of that. I think the earlier anyone can get into this hobby, the better. But once you start getting into like an entry level like Rega or like a normal,
Mm-hmm.
decent turntable speakers, you don't need crazy stuff to go, wow, this sounds amazing, you know? So, um, that's the idea. And I don't know if I'll succeed in this long-term goal or not. I have no idea. Like, big companies can just say they don't want to do it anymore at any time, but, fortunately they're selling, you know, and I think, I don't know. I feel pretty confident that as more and more records come out in this format, that more people will want to do it,
It makes total
you know?
sense. It's like, to me, these records are kind of the Mercedes, right?
Yeah,
And I've
exactly.
got a lot of Hondas, which are fine. They get me where I need to go and they work and
Yeah.
sound beautiful. But, something again, I'll go back to that Tom Petty or that A Perfect Circle. Fuck, it's glorious, man. And
Yeah.
so, especially my favorite records, I could, if I've got a particular Stones record I really want, Some Girls, to me, that's my favorite. That's the one I would have in a
That's my
top
favorite.
quality pressing. The others,
Yes.
maybe I could, I'll accept the Hondas for black and blue. But
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. That's exactly how I look at all this,
Mhm.
right? So, um, I think I sent you a test pressing of my Terry Callier record that's finally going to come out, Occasional Rain.
Mhm.
So I wanted to at least like, plug that a little bit because that'll be up on a pre-order at Slow Down Sounds, probably like within the next 10 days or so. It's going to come out in June. So I'm going to have an actual date and announce the whole record soon. So that's happening. And then, do you ever hear this band out of San Antonio called Hacienda? You ever hear these guys?
I'm not familiar. No.
They were Dan Auerbach's backing band on his first tour as a solo artist.
Okay. Dan Auerbach of Black Keys.
Yeah, the Black Keys, yeah, and he produced their first couple records, and then I had a label inside of a management company, and I signed Hacienda to my label, and Dan produced that record. Anyways, essentially, it was three brothers and a cousin, but now it's just the three brothers, and they took about 12 years off. They've got families, etc., but they're making music. And there's been a record that they made that I put out called Oaxaca Sun that's been streaming for a while, but now I've got a new master of it, and that's up for sale as well. And that's a great like guitar rock record. And those guys are, I've been thinking a lot lately about the world we're living in with so much AI generated music, AI driven algorithms, you know, and jazz. And I feel that it's an interesting time that certain bands, certain music, they deserve to be heard, right? 120,000 songs a day in Spotify. So how in the world are you going to find a Hacienda song? You're not. So how do you figure out? Do you just say, well, no one cares? No, you can't do that with great music and art. You got to find another way around. How do you get people to pay attention to the idea of art? Shit that's coming from someone's heart and soul. It's what they have to do, right? And I think jazz musicians in particular have always been that way. None of the Blue Note records ever sold anything, and yet they're the most collectible records in the world, right? But they didn't sell shit. That's part of the reason they're collectible. So I just keep thinking about the idea of commerce versus art and that age-old sort of conversation. And the thing that came crashing into it is the algorithm and the AI. And, it used to be everyone's biggest goal used to be, how do you get on an editorial playlist, right? Doesn't even matter anymore. Now it's about how do you flood the marketplace so you can jack the algorithm. And so I feel all that plays in to the idea of slow down sounds. The whole name slow down sounds came from the idea of slowing down. And so I'm going to start to double down on some of these creative people that just want to put music out, so stay tuned. I'll let you know.
Yeah. Well, look, when your name is on the back of a record, it's a stamp of approval and certainly makes me, pay attention to it. You've got phenomenal taste, Tom. I just noticed you're you were one of the people who were involved in Soul Coughing Ruby Vroom reissue.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Again, that's kind of a deep cut, and what a wonderful band that, again, I think never had the platform that they deserved.
A great band and great live band, right? So when I was at Warner, they were on Warner. So I worked with those guys really, really closely. So it was a real treat to be able to do the reissue of Ruby Vroom, which, by the way, we got the original tapes. We had them transferred properly. I mean, that record sounds phenomenal. That reissue.
I'd love to hear El Oso on a one step. That would be amazing.
Oh man, all those records, right? Hey, so you're a Soul Coughing fan?
Absolutely. Soul Coughing and Mike Doty. So
okay. So I've got something that I'm making a note to make sure I send you this. We did these homemade Ruby Vroom records. They were playing in LA, and I basically got these records made overnight, more or less. And we did silkscreen stamping for the jacket. And RTI pressed them, and they're awesome. I think they go for a lot of money now, but I've got a couple I jacked, so I'm happy. Happy to send you one.
I would love that. Do you have some time for a couple of requests for upcoming releases? Yeah,
sure.
All right, because I think if anyone can make these happen, it's going to be you, Tom. John Frusciante, Shadows Collide with People. I don't know if are you familiar with this album at all?
Oh yeah, because I was there. So that the label went through Warner, and so yeah, I know those records.
Okay, and yeah. I don't know why they haven't been reissued. Look, I think he's had a few of his records reissued over the years. In fact, they just had one on Record Store Day, but
Yeah.
that wasn't his greatest work, in my opinion. He's got some phenomenal records that Curtains and a few others that were just, they're heart-wrenching. They're just wonderful. Shadows Collide with People has never been reissued and is so hard to find.
I made a note of it for sure. What else would you like to see?
Oh, okay. Again, I don't know much about labels or kind of how this all works.
Okay,
I'll just throw out some
work.
releases. Jellyfish, Spilt Milk.
Well, they just got I don't know if it was Spilt Milk, but one of the Jellyfish records just got reissued as part of that Vinyl series.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So I don't know which one. It's not a one step, but it's
Is that the
but it's a
Vinyl thing where it's like $500 for a record?
No.
Okay.
No, these are like $40-ish or something.
Okay.
They're only D2C records. They're not in stores.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Jellyfish is a good one though.
Jellyfish. Beck, Midnight Vultures.
That needs reissue just in general.
Yeah. Agreed. And I don't know what happened. Like the story I'm telling myself is maybe the masters got caught up in that Universal fire or something, but
I don't think so.
Okay.
Yeah. No. And of course Beck's Sea Change. That's probably the most popular Mo-Fi record they ever did.
Okay.
Yeah, it's very collectible. They did a pink one and then they did black. But yeah, Sea Change would be phenomenal. We're trying on that for sure.
Yeah. What else I got on my list? Oh, Marilyn Manson, Antichrist Superstar.
Yeah. Again, another record that should just be out right now.
It should. I know he's had a lot of controversy, but that's
a lot of fans though.
Well, that record in particular, I can give or take, the rest of his catalog and, pushing his personality and traits aside, that is a phenomenal, produced by Trent Reznor. It needs some sort of celebration there. Also Eminem and 50 Cent. There's a lot. I don't think Get Rich or Die Trying has properly been reissued.
Yeah. Those are both inside of Interscope, and we did do Dr. Dre The Chronic, which was from tape and sounds amazing. And so, yeah, those are conversation pieces currently for sure, at least in the case of Eminem, Yeah.
Okay. And one thing, again, I like about some of the reissues you're doing is there is a celebration of hip hop. There's not a lot of, are there any other hip hop one-step albums?
Mo-Fi did not do a one-step, but they did a one or two Run DMC record several years ago, but no one's done a one-step. And by the way, Dre in particular, his production and all those live musicians, that record sounds phenomenal, So it's an education process to that community of why these records are so expensive. But when you hear it, there's no denying like, wow, this is pretty freaking phenomenal. Even 2001 is a great sounding record.
Was it originally a single record, and then this is a double?
Well, Chronic was a single record.
Yeah.
And then it got flipped to a double record at some point. The one step's definitely obviously a double record, but that's not the first double record. It started becoming a 2-record set. I forget exactly when, but it's been 2 records for a while.
Yeah.
And I think 2001 was always 2 records, I think.
Okay. Yeah. 2001 hasn't been out too. So yeah, that's another.
Yeah. That would be a good one.
Cool. Anything else coming out you could share? Any other hints you could drop?
You know what? I've been away, so I didn't get a chance to talk to anyone to ask about laying some Easter eggs on you. So I probably can't. But there are so many great titles ranging from classic Motown to grunge to just straight ahead rock. There's so many balls in the air with just a little bit of luck. Very soon they'll be like, oh my God, look what's happening. Some really meaningful bands that are currently having some of the biggest success they've ever had.
Okay.
And so I'm hopeful for those things. And and it's kind of crazy to me that we've never been able to get Neil Young over the line yet on a one step. And so, it all began with his conversation. you know? So there's always that to stay focused on too, you know? Hey, Nate, we'd be a little bit remiss if we didn't talk about Record Store Day real quick before, at
Sure.
least,
That's fine.
yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. So that's another thing that I did back in the day is, Michael Kurtz, Eric Levin, I can't remember, all Chris Brown. There's like, different people that were involved in the very beginning, but they were trying to get this idea of a holiday celebrating record stores off the ground, and nobody would give them a budget. And they came to see me when I was running Warner, and it was like the greatest idea I ever heard.
So you were there at the genesis of this.
100%. I was the only person who found money for them. It took 2 seconds. I mean, I thought it was such a great idea, you know? And so I'm still close to, to Record Store Day in general, like Michael and Carrie, and, I go to summer camp and stuff. So it's amazing to see not just about the titles that come out for Record Store Day, but just the overall business happening on Record Store Day. Because it's not just about the titles that come out for that day, like yesterday, right? That's the driver. But I was in 3 stores yesterday. I mean, people were just buying everything, it seemed. It wasn't just things that came out for Record Store Day. It was just kind of nonstop.
Mm-hmm.
It was wild, you know?
Yeah, I talk to a lot of record stores, you may imagine, and especially down here, we don't get as many RSD titles.
Right.
Just, I mean, the distance,
Yeah.
right? And so most record stores, or a significant part of them, they will just, they'll put extra specials out. They'll save stuff throughout the year for Record Store Day and make it kind of a celebrate. But as long as you go into a record store and buy something, and a lot of them will do 30% of their annual business over that weekend. Some of it's incredible.
The people that I've spoken with so far, which isn't very many, but everyone so far has said it's the biggest day they've ever had. And that says something because last year was so big. No, I mean, it's just crazy that it keeps getting bigger and bigger. But I know that it's not just based on the titles that come out. It's based on all these different records that people are just going in, and CDs too, for that matter, just celebrating that culture. I mean, I went into a store yesterday in Chicago, and like I could barely move. There were so many people,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and I'm sure that Amoeba had them lined up for blocks. They always do,
Mm-hmm.
Here in LA. And I just think it's such a great day to, I mean, every day is kind of Record Store Day for you and me, but it is great to see how casual people get brought into the fold. And, I was down, you know, um, visiting Andrea and Reg at Sims, which is one of the indie coalitions here. There's like the Department of Record Stores, there's Ames and there's Sims. So I was down in Birmingham maybe a month or so ago, and, went to Seasick Records. It was just popping with people. I mean, just people buying records and hanging out. And now there's this amazing vinyl bar behind it that's, this guy started. It's High Dive, Hi-Fi bar. Amazing sound system. I mean, the whole hi-fi bar culture, it's everywhere now.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just in like New York and LA, or clearly, obviously, forever in Japan, right? But it's like there's like these things are popping up all over the place. So the whole culture of the shit that we love, it's amazing to see it continue to grow. It's really exciting.
Yeah, I know there are a lot of people with opinions on Record Store Day, and to me, whether someone wants to pick up a David Bowie picture disc or not, that's to me, that is someone who is enjoying music, who's spending a bit of money, who's allowing themselves to spend money on something that they will learn from and enjoy. I think nothing but good can come from it. And it clearly has, because we now have a whole nother generation, possibly too, of people who really value the music and the tactile experience. And that's something that was in real danger of getting lost for some time.
Yeah, and you're totally right that that there are conflicting opinions from some people, you know. But I find that most of those opinions are very general and also, not really. I just don't really know that they're that valid, because even if you don't want to participate in the overall idea of like these select records or whatever, don't you want to celebrate your store?
Mm-hmm.
Like, don't you want to try to get as many people to come in and shop as possible? Like, if you don't want to do that, okay, then maybe you're valid. But if your whole idea of having a store is to make a living and to be able to like sell music to people, I don't have any idea why you wouldn't think that's a great day. you know, like don't spend all your money on the new shit they're putting out, but not to celebrate that day is foolish.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, Record Safari, that store, you've been in there a bunch of times, whatnot, they don't bring in any of the new releases, but they celebrate Record Store Day. They got 25% off. They put out 700 new used records. The culture of Record Store Day is very much inside Record Safari, even though they don't have one new title.
I don't know anyone who celebrates Record Store Day more than Alex over there.
Yeah. And to be fair, Record Safari at Coachella did have all the titles.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, they had the RSD. Okay, yeah. He's all over the place. I love how I see him pop up all over the place. And
oh yeah, talk about like that guy's deep, man.
Yeah, fully. But
we're newbies. We're newbies compared to him.
Well, Tom, it's been such an amazing conversation, and I've always wanted to have you on the show. Thank you for making the time. And again, what you're doing here for the vinyl community and the music community is absolutely outstanding. I mean, not just the releases and everything, but the history and your excitement about it. It really is infectious. And I think awesome. You're the butterfly that's kind of waved its wings and made changes throughout the world. So we do thank you for your service, sir. Final question. How'd you get the nickname Grover?
Oh my goodness. It's an old radio name from years and years ago. I started out being on the air and working in record stores. And honestly, like it basically just, the guy was like, "Oh, you can't be Tom. That's a dumb name to be on the radio, Grover." And I wanted the job so bad, I didn't give a shit what he called me. And it began like that, and it stuck. And so that's a long time ago at this point. So it's been Grover for a long time. And thank you for the kind words, Nate. You're also a champion of all this. I've been following the Vinyl Guide for a long, long time, and the amount of hikes in Griffith Park that I would listen to the new episodes, and some of your interviews and people you talk with, and everyone's down, right? It's this really amazing culture that I feel so honored to have like a little piece of influence on. It's amazing, and there's so much great music in the world that we're never going to have enough time to get to, but we try.
That's part of the adventure, And I always find whenever I go to a new city, sometimes new country, and I find where the record stores are at, those are my people. If they don't speak English, they don't, whatever. Record store people are my people. Record fair people are my people. I'm going to Austin Record Fair. They're all nerds like us. And the neighborhoods that the record stores are in, you'll have the good burrito shops. You'll have the excellent coffee. People who enjoy quality are generally in that ecosystem. So
that is so true, Nate.
Yeah. All right. Well, hopefully you and I will be in front of a fish taco or a coffee at some point. Tom, thank you again, man.
Anytime. Appreciate you.
Lovely man, that Tom Grover Biery. Always wanted to have him on the show. Glad we made it happen. And he's doing some amazing stuff. These records sound absolutely gorgeous. They really do. So grab one, A/B it with one of your other favorite, pressings of that album. And I'm pretty sure you're probably going to go back and try to restock up on others. They really sound that good. And that's it for this episode of The Vinyl Guide. Thank you so much for tuning in. Appreciate everyone who's leaving positive reviews on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Of course, those of you who are sharing on social media, that is super awesome as well. And we'll be back shortly with a brand new episode. So until we talk next time, you all behave yourselves. And thanks again for listening to the Vinyl Guide podcast. Cheers.